Welcome back. We are now going to proceed into 3.5 sessions around a single theme. We will have representatives from Optimizely, well, you'll describe Optimizely, but it's about the placement of ads and organization of web pages and other marketing campaigns using data analysis. Kabam, a gaming company, and Mailchimp, the mail company. And each of them will talk about the uses of data, and then we'll speak together for an additional 20 or 30 minutes with some time for questions around a theme of using data on the fly inside a specific business process. Much of what we've talked about previously are large projects over time with careful, thought out presentations of big ideas. But there is also this other aspect I want to explore now about using data inside this iterative process that's quick moving. So I'll proceed with Kyle Rush from Optimizely. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. As you said, my name is Kyle Rush. I work for a company called Optimizely, and we make A/B testing software for web and now mobile, iOS applications. My interests are in this intersection between engineering, user experience, and data. That doesn't mean that I'm a data scientist. I work with a lot of data scientists, so just to set everybody's expectations there. And so I'm going to be talking about some case studies about the intersection of those 3 points that our team uncovered at the Obama campaign. And so for some context, before we get started, the Obama campaign in 2012 raised $690 million online, which is a vast sum of money, which we didn't think was possible. And we ran about 500 experiments, and these were A/B tests or multivariate tests. And we did weeks of user testing. So this is on the qualitative data side, watching your users actually use your application. And this is an interesting little data point that I think displays well our focus on data. And we sent about over 668 million custom events to Google Analytics. And these are just arbitrary events. They would capture any sort of data that we were after. But we wanted the whole landscape. So anything that we thought was important, we would attach a Google Analytics event to it. And it was really easy to store it there. We didn't have to actually build that data store. And actually, on a political campaign, you don't really have time to build your own data store. You have to use existing tools, right? Because there's an end date, and that end date you find out if you want or not, which is not typical of a regular company. And so the results of all that work were a 49% increase in the donation page conversion rate and 161% increase in the email acquisition rate. And email acquisition was important to us. I think it's obvious that money and donations was important because you unfortunately can't win a political or a presidential election in the US without money. But email signups were important for us because a lot of people didn't realize this, but 90% of our revenue came in from email campaigns. And so getting more emails and building that list was super important to us. And so one of the products that we were produced on the campaign, which hadn't been done before, but is kind of a no-brainer in hindsight, is a product called Quick Donate. And this is one-click donations. And like I said, it's kind of crazy that this hadn't been done before, but it hadn't. And so I've got some screenshots of the different aspects of this product. The top one that you see, that little button there, is how it would look on our website if you were logged into your account and you had donated before or saved your payment information. You would get a suggested amount, and that was based on a formula that our actual data scientists produced. And then on the left, you see SMS donations. And this is something that hadn't been done before because at the time, the Federal Election Commission had a rule that political campaigns can't use SMS short codes. And a short code is when, I think you guys saw this when there was an earthquake in Haiti. The Red Cross would air television commercials asking people to donate to like 5555, and then that would be on your mobile phone. And that would be subtracted from your AT&T or Verizon phone bill. But that was off limits for political campaigns, so we actually had to engineer a way around that. And then also, this also hadn't been done before, but we would send out links to your email, and once you clicked on one of the links, so if you clicked $35 and you were authenticated in the browser, once the browser opened up, it would just say thank you. And so this program in total raised about 115 million and had 1.5 million users. So it was very critical to our success because it was a very tight fundraising race. And it also only had a 10-month lifespan. It launched in January of 2012, and the election was on November 7th. And so what I want to talk about is optimizing these products, these online fundraising products that we built. This is sort of a typical flow for us, but not everything evolved in this sort of fashion. The first step was always data gathering because we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on the right things. And without data, you really can't get a scope of the problem you're trying to solve. So like I said, we made heavy use of Google Analytics, but we also had just a ton of other information. We had users authenticating with their Facebook application. We had the voter file for the country, and we performed matches on that, and based on your donation history. So we had a lot of information to sort of calculate ROI on the task that we were trying to do. And then once we justified one of our problems as the top priority, we sometimes would do observation, right? So we would see users actually using our application. And this is super important because as engineers, we too often think that we are the typical use case for the product. And I'm going to show you a great example of this later, but it's the wrong way to think about it. And then obviously there's experimentation. So once you have your data there, you can actually put it into action by seeing the effect of what you're changing. And so what I want to focus on is form errors. And I think it's a good thing to focus on because I don't know really anybody that focuses on this, whoever has a form. And if you have an application that you have a sign up for it, you definitely have a form. But a lot of people just don't pay attention to this, and it's really, really important, and I'll show you why. So this was the donate form that we had when we started thinking about form errors. And the thing was that we weren't tracking form errors at all, just like everybody else. We had no idea how many times somebody would hit validation error for email address if they incorrectly typed that. We had no idea if people were not putting in the city. We had no idea really how confusing the form was. And so we started off on the data gathering mission. And so this is an example of a Google Analytics custom event. As you can see, it's just one line of code of JavaScript. And it's super easy. It's arbitrary. And like I said, we don't have to build the data store or the models to view it. It all just happens in Google Analytics. And so this is an example. This isn't an exact line from the code base, but it's pretty similar to what we actually sent out. And so whenever you would hit a validation error on one of the fields, we would send that out and describe it. And so this is a screenshot of what happened after we did that. And you can see the number one value there is just that the submission had errors in it. And then we've got number 2 is card number. So that was somebody actually didn't enter the card number correctly. And then 3 and 4 are an employer and occupation, which I'm going to focus on now, but I'll get back to card number in a second. So I should first say that when we found out that employer and occupation were high error rate, we couldn't really figure that out because it seemed like a really simple question to us, right? If you asked us at the time, what is your employer, we'd say Obama for America, and your occupation is web developer. Which seems like a very simple question. And so we actually were working with the team that puts together our Federal Election Commission's report because you have to report all of your income for a political campaign. And we found that a lot of people were entering in information in those fields that was like none of your business, I'm not going to tell you, which is like, which is fair because I don't think those are standard fields for, when you're gathering money or making a purchase online. Amazon doesn't ask you for that information, so, our users are expecting us to not answer. And if it was up to us, we wouldn't have asked for that information. It wasn't really all that important to us. But the Federal Election Commission says for reporting reasons, you have to collect that information. So for a long time, that was our hypothesis. We just thought, it's an unsolvable problem. People are uncomfortable providing that information. And then we decided to do some user testing, where we would sit a person down on a computer and we would record the eyesight camera on the Mac. So it records their face so that we can get a lot of facial cues, when their eyebrows move up and down, when they're confused on the form. And then at the same time, it records the screen. So we can see exactly how the user is using the form. And then we would just tell them to make a donation. And we made the form not actually charge them. And so we learned a lot from that. What happened is we were very lucky because we had a ton of volunteers that wanted to come into headquarters, and this was in Chicago. And so each day we would have like 30 volunteers walk through the doors of headquarters at least. And the interesting thing is that, and I think this is just sort of coincidence in this case, is that a lot of people who can volunteer on political campaigns are students and retired people. And so this is something that we were not even considering about our forums, right? And so if you think at it from that perspective, and you ask a student, what is your occupation? Well, they don't have one. And what is their employer? They also don't have one, right? And so what would happen is we would observe a retired person sitting on the form, and then they would see these 2 form fields that are required, not know what to enter, and then hit submit, and then it would come back and say there's an error. And the answer had not changed. They still don't have an employer occupation, so they would hit it again, and it would hit submit. And that's why you saw a huge difference between the uniques and the total events on these on errors on these 2 fields. And so we would just watch them sit there and hit the submit button like several times. And it was just like, oh my God, this is very humbling. Like, how is our form this difficult to use? It's so easy. Like you could enter like anything in the fields. You could enter like the letter A, and it would go through. You just had to enter something. And so to a developer who works on the command line all day, it's like, okay, this is simple. But to an average user, it's not. And so that was why that part of the process was super important to us. And so we took that qualitative data and then we put it in an experiment. And so our idea was to just add a 1 line of copy underneath those fields that was a hint on what you should do if you don't have that information. And the line just said, if you're retired, enter retired in both fields. And you can see our control and our variation right here. And again, it's just that one little line at the bottom. And this resulted in a 63% reduction in the error rate on those 2 fields, right, which is huge. And so these fields after this were no longer a problem. And it's crazy to think that we didn't understand our audience enough that we didn't know that students and retired folks were donating a lot to the campaign. But this is what we learned. And so another interesting thing is that there was no detectable effect on revenue or conversions. And so you might think, oh, great, you made the form easier, but that really made no difference to the bottom line of the campaign. And so that's the interesting part about this whole experiment that I want to talk about. And I'll get back to that in a second, but once we found out that we could get reductions in errors like this, we just went whole hog and started attacking all the problems that we saw in the form from Google Analytics. And so this is the credit card number that I was talking about earlier. This is our control, and we called this variation, excuse me, formatting. And the problem that we observed is that it's very difficult for human beings to remember 16 digits. Really, you can only remember like 2, 3, 4 max when they're told to you or when you're actually reading them. And so on credit cards, you notice like on a Visa, they're separated by groups of 4. And on Amex, it's a little bit different. But we had the idea to represent what you see visually on the form exactly how you would see it on your credit card, because that's probably easier to enter, right? And so what you probably may or may not be able to see is we also changed the font so that it matched the credit card font. And we got a 15% reduction in the errors here, just to make it easier for a user to see what's on the screen and match what was on their credit card. So again, we also observed with this no difference in revenue and no difference in the conversion rate. So we didn't get any more donations or any more money detectably. And so here's sort of a little recap. Conversions, statistical tie, revenue, statistical tie, and errors, we got a reduction. But the interesting thing is that this is part of a conversion funnel. So after you make a donation, we ask you to do a follow-up action. And the follow-up action was related to Quick Donate, the program I was talking before. We would tokenize your payment information and save it temporarily. And then once you, the donation process correctly, you'd land on a page where we said, now would you like to save your payment information? And so interestingly, we always made sure to track conversion goals for each part of the funnel, because you might expect that the change that you are going to make to the landing page only happens, the effect is only, it's isolated to that landing page. But actually what we observed is that it actually can affect the follow-up actions. And so Quick Donate opt-ins, we got an increase. And so one of these tests that we were running, reducing the error rate, it was a very small reduction in the error rate, probably like 10%. We observed a 7% increase in the Quick Donate opt-ins. And so you might ask, why is that so important for us? And so here's a little profile of Quick Donate users and why we were so aggressive with Quick Donate. Quick Donate users gave 4 times as often, and they gave 3 times as much money. So this is versus regular non-Quick Donate users. And so this is like money in the bank. We were really aggressive in courting these users and getting more users into the program. So this is a huge win for us. But if on surface value, it didn't really seem like a huge win because there was no difference in the conversion rate or revenue. And so here's just another little experiment that I think is interesting because it did not. It's not a huge change to the form. And so this is what the Quick Donate opt-in form looked like. Right after you made a donation, you'd see this. And the thing that we changed is we always tried to change whatever took the most visual real estate on the page, because the theory is that the bigger change you make, the bigger return you can expect. And so this is sort of an example of that, but sort of not. The header here says save your payment information for next time, and our idea was to sort of link this action to the previous action. So if you look at this part right here, it seems very disconnected. It seems like we're asking you to do two things. But this header right here where it says now, it sort of connects it to the previous action and says save your payment information. And so this is like a weird little psychological trick that you can do on your users and make it seem like they're both the same action. And so just by changing a couple of words in that, we got a 21% increase in opt-ins. So if you add that up and then all the increases in opt-ins that we got from reducing the error rate, we made a huge impact in the number of people that were using Quick Donate. And again, those users were much more valuable to us than someone just making a donation without their saved payment information. And so we tried a number of different things to get people opted into Quick Donate. And here's another one that we tried. Somebody had the idea that maybe asking the user on a follow-up page was not the best idea. Maybe we could just ask them on the form, right? And maybe we could even pre-check that. And so we pre-checked it. You can see the little checkbox down there. That's the only change. Actually, this is a bad screenshot because the numbers don't match, but the numbers were the same. So that variable didn't change. But save my payment information checkbox was added. And so the idea was that people wouldn't uncheck it, and then they don't even have to see the second screen, and we can actually get them further down the funnel because we're doing 2 steps in one. And so after they've saved their payment information, then we can ask them to volunteer to register voters or something. And so when we did that, we got a 44% reduction in Save Your Quick Donate opt-ins. And I'm not really sure why that is. In a political campaign with an end date, it's a little bit tricky to do optimization because you don't really have time to run follow-up experiments to figure out the psychology of why that happened. You just care that it happened, and right? So we never added another checkbox to our donate form after this, and we were very scared. But it didn't deter us from trying other things, right? Because this is just a temporary reduction in the conversion rate, which is vastly offset by the permanent changes that we deploy from the winners, right? So this wasn't really that big of a deal for us, but it was kind of eye-opening in that you can't always just assume that, like adding a checkbox and pre-checking it, which you would think would work, it doesn't work that well. I think it's probably, if I had to guess, I would say users are very familiar or used to, when they're submitting a form, unchecking all of the, you guys probably all do this, you uncheck everything at the end, right, so you don't get any emails. You're like, oh, don't bother me, I don't want any more emails. And so I think that's probably what happened. And so that's, interesting. I think some slides got taken out, but that's all of my presentation, so thank you guys very much.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ken Yu. I'm the Director of Analytics at Kabam. And today I'm going to talk to you about how Kabam uses data science to make fun games available for hundreds of millions of players worldwide. So for the audience who doesn't know who Kabam is, we're actually one of the 10 largest mobile game developer in the world with over $300 million in revenue last year. Our games are free to play, which means that anyone can go online and download our games free of charge. Some of our players enjoy our game so much that they decide to spend money in purchasing virtual goods in the game. And it's the revenue that we derive from these selling of virtual goods that enables us to reinvest in bringing new and exciting features and content to all players, regardless of whether they pay or not. Some of our biggest and best known games are shown here: Kingdoms of Camelot, Hobbit, and Fast and Furious. You might have seen them, or you might play them even. Thank you very much. Kingdoms of Camelot was the first game that started it all about 5 years ago. But the company was actually founded a little bit before then, back in 2006. Three of our four founders are actually Calgrats, as was I, and a significant percentage of our employees. And so we have a very deep connection with Berkeley, and that's why we're very excited and incredibly honored to have partnered with Berkeley on the stadium field naming rights of Memorial Stadium, now known as the Kabam Field. I was just drove by this morning by the new stadium, and it looks beautiful, and I cannot wait for the new football season to start. So a little bit about my team. So I have 6 data scientists on my team. We operate in a centralized function, kind of like internal consultants within the company, because our team is so small for a company of the size of about 1,000 people, but our expertise is highly sought after. And so we have to be smart and be strategic about where we kind of place this resource. And so we typically want to focus on solving problems that brings high ROI across our entire portfolio of products. And some of the problems that we worked on are listed here. User acquisition is a really interesting one. Typically, we do our marketing online digitally because that's where our games are too. And so there's incredibly good tools and tracking to understand the players that are brought into the game, and we can optimize that way. But we've started recently to do more offline advertising as well. And this is one of the screenshots of our TV spot, where you see that a role-playing elf and a dwarf are battling each other in a game of Hobbit on their iPads. So it's tracking the performance and effectiveness of advertising offline is a much harder challenge and a very interesting one to solve. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with all these other ones. The one that's really near and dear to my heart is really working on games. Back in my undergrad days, when I'm not working on crazy CS projects buried across the street in Soda Hall, if Joe Hellestein was here, I would give him a piece of my mind. But when I'm not doing that, I would be actually spending time playing games, like StarCraft, Diablo with my friends, and so I've always have a very strong interest in games, and that's why I was really excited to work in Kabam, because I got a chance to kind of marry the two things that I really like, games and data science. And game design is kind of the meat of my talk here. So the title of my talk is using data science to make fun games, but here I put a question mark because I kind of wanted to dispel some of the myths around big data and data science. It's certainly true that data science is a critical part of Kabam, of our game development. Because our games are online, we can basically view and track every single action that our players are taking every minute in real time. And we have billions of events streaming into our system on a daily basis. So that's big data, all right. And with this kind of information, developers can basically tell at real time how our players are responding to the features that they built. And they can run live A/B tests and to basically gauge the response of how players are reacting to the changes. And looking at data, they can decide on the spot whether they like what they see or they need to make further changes. And so that enables us to do quick iteration and continuous improvement into our game. And I think that's really a game changer for free-to-play online games compared to traditional console or PC games where really the developer doesn't have a good sense of how the players respond to the things that the features that they developed. Big data, just because you can throw a bunch of data into Hadoop, that's not going to be able to allow you to solve all the problems of your business. Big data and data science is not a panacea. In our case, in our domain, we need to have someone who have domain expert in understanding what players want, what they like, the psychology of games, and that's in our company, those are the game designers. They are the ones who can come up with new and exciting and addictive features, such as for example, matching candy tiles to create fantastic explosions, or navigating a Flappy Bird through a course, and those are the things that only game designers know how to do. So we think that we need to strike that balance of data science and art of game design, and blending that art and science is what we think that the reason for our success at Kabam. So now I'm going to talk about 3 examples of how we actually use data to make changes to our game and game design. This first example here is about adjusting difficulty of the game. So the concept of progression is an essential one in our games. We want to know how our players are progressing in the game, and that's measured by the levels that they completed in the game, which is shown on the x-axis here, and how easy and how fast they're doing that task, which is shown on the y-axis here, is represented as the percentage of them completing that task. And what we typically want to do is slowly changing the difficulty of the game so that it becomes more and more challenging to engage our players, which is kind of shown this green line is what you would want to do. In this example, you can see that there are some levels where it's much harder for our players to beat. For example, here and here, and those are basically the choke points where players are getting frustrated and getting disengaged from the game. And so these are very simple low-hanging fruits that you can pick. And you can apply this type of similar concept in your business. Just as Kyle was talking about optimizing a conversion flow. You can think of this as a funnel where you expect your users to complete a set of steps to get to an end goal. And you want to be able to collect data and follow where your users are dropping off. And that can bring a lot of value to improving the flow. The second example is about understanding the social dynamics of our game. And one key mechanic in our game is ability for our players to battle against one another. We call that PvP, or player versus player. And then there's also a concept of an alliance where a group of players can team up and compete against another group of players. We call them alliances. So this is a screenshot of what an alliance information screen looked like. So I'm in this top one, call them top men. And this is basically rank ordered by the power of the alliances and number of players in that alliance and who the leader is. And you can also see that which alliance you're hostile against, which is this red shield here. So we do a lot of battle against each other. And so we can transform this alliance information into a network graphs where each node represents one alliance, and each edge between nodes are basically the intensity of that PvP, or battles between the two alliances. The color of the node represents how skilled each alliance is at doing PvP. The blue color means that you're dishing out more damage than you're taking, and red is basically the opposite. And the size of each node is basically the number of members in the alliance. And also want to introduce the concept of a server, which is basically an isolated environment where a subset of our players go. And the reasons that we want to do that is because we want to facilitate the communication and interactions of players based on kind of their attributes. Some of those attributes include time zone, geography, the languages, and the skill level. So for example, when I get off work and go home and want to play a game, it's not very comforting for me to know that when I'm in trouble and need help and need someone to bail me out, my European teammates are all sleeping. So that's not fun. Right? So this is one server. And so by understanding these network graphs, we can see a development of organic social dynamics coming out of different servers of various different players playing in it. And these are 4 examples. So a little bit cut off here, but the server A is what I just showed. And if you compare it to server B, where there's tons of these edges between nodes, you can see that basically you can make a conclusion that server A is a much more peaceful environment compared to server B. And we call the players in server A, they're huggers, and B is they're fighters. And if you compare B to C, they're both fairly active battling state between alliances. But the distinctive different thing on C is that you see that there's this one alliance, the top alliance, is basically dominating over everybody else in this domain. And in server D is also a fairly peaceful environment, similar to server A. But what's different about server D is that it's kind of like a meta alliance going on, where you can see that these two alliances are basically cooperating and working and fighting against these two other alliances. So by understanding what the dynamics on our games, we can customize the content and basically cater to different style of play and maximize players' satisfaction that way. And so the key is we should all try to understand what our customer want and need, and that can bring significant value to your business. The last example here goes back to my introduction about how we're kind of combining game design and data science. But this is a counterexample of where the intuitions of our game design is actually proven wrong. So let me talk a little bit about how this game works. So it doesn't show up very well, but it's basically a variation of a match tree game like Candy Crush, where the objective is you want to line up the different color tiles, 3 or more of them in a vertical or horizontal direction. And the more you can do that, we call these combos. The more combos you can generate it, the troops of the same color would then have more power, where it can go out and attack the opponent. And the way that you rearrange these tiles is you pick up one of these and move them or drag them, and it's going to correspond to the neighboring tile to move in the opposite direction. And the best way is for me to play a video of how this actually works. So these are the troops that I have. These are the enemies that I'm fighting against. And so this player is going to pick up this tile, do these crazy moves, and for the life of me, I can't figure it out. But so what you just saw is he basically rearranged a bunch of color tiles, and they correspond to giving the troops power and attack these enemies. And we'll see another example. So there's a total of, once you start moving a tile, there's a timer here. You have 6 seconds total to basically complete your move and get as many combos as you want. Again, basically you got a combo in every color, so all the troops of various colors are going to have power, and it's going to go out and attack. So that's the gameplay. So the two things that are critical that we can measure is how many combos that you can generate, and how long is the move, your drag move. And we know that basically for good players, skilled players, they would drag longer and do these, basically these crazy moves that will generate a lot of combos. And an ignorant player like me would just do these simple moves of basically just moving one tile one at a time and just get maybe one combo each time. So the hypothesis of our game designers is that these ignorant players, they're not going to be able to enjoy the game as much because they can't generate these big combos and powerful attacks against their enemies, and they're going to lose interest. But that turns out not to be the case based on the data. And what you see here is we show a number of combos of our different players and the level of engagement, 1 being the least engaged and 5 being the most engaged, they play the most. You can see that across all the different engagement levels, we have skilled players and ignorant players. And the distribution are almost exactly the same. So in this case, the null hypothesis was we could not reject that. To some people, that might be dissatisfying because we didn't really discover anything new. But in my mind, that learning of this basically this hypothesis doesn't matter. Saves us time so that our game developers don't have to invest in solving a problem that doesn't exist in the first place. So the three different types of analysis that I just go through doesn't really depend on any fancy tools or techniques. In our business, we definitely use some advanced techniques like predictive modeling, recommendation engines, and machine learning techniques, and when the situation is appropriate. But at that point, that problem actually, to some extent, becomes simpler because you already have a very clear goal and objective in your mind. For example, if I'm trying to build a predictive model for churn, that means I pretty much have a very good idea that, yeah, churn is an important problem for my business, and I have a good way of quantifying or classifying what a churn is, and also should have good data sets to construct features that I think that would have bearing over the predictability of churn. And once you have all of that, you can throw that into into your favorite statistical program or platform and get a model, right? But the key thing to enable that is really having comprehensive and robust data instrumentation and collection, and very in-depth analysis and thorough understanding of your business. And finally, the thing that enables that all is tools, right? Good tools, be it data cleansing or ETL or visualization or statistical modeling. Those things those dollars that you invest in tools is going to bring tremendous return. That's beyond what you spend. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you. Reach out to me if you look for a job.
All right, so hello everyone. I'm John Foreman, and I am the chief scientist at Mailchimp. Don't put a lot of weight in that job title. I gave it to myself. So I'm a former operations research consultant, which means my background is not in predictive modeling or data mining. It's actually in optimization, which is very related, but a slightly different field. And I'm a former consultant to large organizations. So I have a heart for really slow-moving companies where you tell everyone what to do from the top down. So it was really weird for me to enter into the startup environment because as an analytics consultant, I only dealt with internal analytics teams at large companies. I never dealt with just other teams about a startup, maybe designers or whatever. Then I showed up at Mailchimp. I'll talk a bit about Mailchimp. Do we have any users here? Few users? Yay! So it depends where I'm at, how many users we have. So if I go to South by Southwest, everyone in the room is a user. If I go to like Informs, no one's a user. We're the largest email service provider in the world. We have 5 million users. Many of those would be small businesses who send email marketing through us. So it could be a newsletter for your local brewery. You could have a fantasy football league and you want to send a newsletter, whatever. We send about 9 billion emails a month. And then we track about 3 billion actions on top of it, opens, clicks. You can drop JavaScript on your site, watch users as they leave your newsletter to go to your site, and so what do you do there? What did you check out with, et cetera. You can track all that through our application. And 2 of our domains are some of the largest in the world, Mailchimp.com as well as our list management domain. And we are all in sunny, humid Atlanta. So we are also hiring if you want to be humid. So I show up at Mailchimp and I meet this guy. This is Greg. He is a designer. Fabio is a designer. Designer, art director, designer, t-shirt designer. We make things like this. This is the billboard outside of our office. And this is some swag that we give away. This is our vinyl Freddy doll. This is our head of user experience. He wrote a very famous design book called Designing for Emotion. So these are the types of people all of a sudden I was going to be working with. This is our CEO, Ben. He is a man of many talents. He does have a design background. He designed banner ads many moons ago. So what I quickly learned that had not been apparent to me as an analytics consultant, most companies are not in the business of analytics. If all you do is read articles about big data, it seems like all you read about is like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and they kind of make their money off of data, right? But most companies don't. So a company like Delta Airlines, they make their money off of flying planes, and then they use their data to better price their butts and seats and get maybe 2% revenue uplift. So most companies just don't make their money off of data and analytics. And what I realized really quickly was that every team at Mailchimp, this was the objective. Improve the product, improve the user's experience of that product. And so as a data science team, I had to get in line with this. And so I went online to figure out, okay, how does a data scientist do that? Well, surely other companies are doing that. And so I just looked for examples. So this is an example from a very popular restaurant review, sort of business review website. Okay, so I went on there and tried to figure out, how is this improving the user experience? I can go into this heat map of stuff, and I can see that I can pick a city, they're curated. I can pick a keyword, so I picked San Francisco and hipster because Atlanta's not on there, which is very sad for me. And it just sort of tells me all the hipsters are in the Mission, which I already knew. I don't even live in San Francisco, and I already know this, right? So this isn't about improving my user experience of the website. This is about flexing analytic muscle for somebody, probably the press, maybe an investor. Okay, well, let me go to another site and figure this out. This is from a popular professional social network. I can look at all of my professional connections and see who I'm connected to. Oh, look, I'm connected to Hillary Mason. I already knew that because we're connected. And then it, maybe it uses modularity maximization or something to color clusters of people. And then I look at the clusters. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the people I went to school with. Of course they're in a cluster. So once again, it's just parroting back information to me that I already knew. This is really not for the user, right? This is to impress someone else, perhaps right before they went public. I don't know. Then maybe I look at technologies, and that's just terribly unhelpful, right? So this is just a really bad place to start. Vendors, I'm sure, would love to tell you how to do data science at your company. But there's just a lot of noise, right? And so maybe I'll look at version 2.0 of that slide, which I found online, and it's even more noisy. So this is a very confusing way to go about things. And what I discovered is that most companies go about data science or big data in this way, right? They start by choosing tools first, which is kind of easy to do because there are all of these vendors out there that are like clamoring to tell you why their tool is so great. So I'll just choose some tools. My competitors probably already have them, and the vendor's going to tell me, your competitor has this tool, you need this tool. I'm going to buy them first. I don't really know what's possible, but I've read some articles that say, like, oh, you should be doing similarity calculations like Netflix or Amazon and recommending that your users also buy socks. So maybe I'll do that for some reason. And then they flail about, right? So companies flail about, don't really know how to move on, and then they generate an infographic to prove that their money has been well spent, right? So, of course it was good that we spent millions of dollars, because check out this cool infographic that I have. I propose that this is a better way to go through operating data science at a normal company. Know what's possible first. The hard thing here is that you don't show progress, right? So the easiest way to show progress when I want to lose weight, New Year's Day or whatever, is to go out and just like buy weights and clothes and be like, I'm totally losing weight because I just bought all these supplements. But you're not actually losing weight. You're just feeling like you're showing progress. That's kind of like spending your data science budget. But if you can just learn what's possible by going around the company, talking to other teams, finding out what data stores there are, because most companies have data stores just scattered about. Some of them, sadly, are like a spreadsheet that someone maintains, right? So what are all these data stores? What techniques are available to me? And what technologies are available to me? And vendors will certainly help you with that piece. If I know all that's possible first, and then I identify problems or opportunities to solve, then I can choose everything from this list above, choose the right data, choose the right techniques, choose the right technologies that solve that problem. So this is kind of a more orderly approach to business. And for this techniques thing, you can buy my book and learn all about them. It's basically just a survey of various data science techniques available to you. Okay, so how does the data science team at Mailchimp work? We also operate like an internal consultancy, much like Kabam. And the way we like to think about things is in this sort of grid. We have internal customers and external customers. External customers would be our users. Internal customers would be other teams, right? And we can provide insights or capabilities. Insights are basically just research, one-time studies, results that we can show, hey, look, here's your data set, here's your report, here's what we found. Capabilities would be products, right? So these are things that the end user can use over and over and over again to help themselves, and we can build those products. And so I'm just going to walk through sort of each corner in this grid and show you an example of what that looks like. We probably spend about 20% of our time doing research and another 80% of our time building tools. We focus on tools primarily because you just get more bang for your buck, right? The tool lives on, data, the research tends to be a one-time thing. Sometimes if people really love research, then we turn that into a tool. Okay, so let's start with internal insights. This is where our support team sits in Atlanta. We're currently hiring one support person every other day because we're bringing on users so quickly. I think we brought on 200,000 sending users. So users are actually sending email to us. They're that engaged. We added 200,000 in the first quarter of this year. So it's pretty crazy over there. We offer email support, chat support. And there was one sad support person who was in charge of making the schedule, which essentially is like, we have all these shifts of people that come in, right? You've got a 6 a.m. shift, an 8 a.m. shift, an 11 a.m. shift. We had a night shift, and they have to decide, okay, when these people come in, when is each person taking their lunch break? Who's on email, who's on chat, so that they're not going back and forth. There are all these crazy rules. There are multiple options for lunch. There are constraints around lunch, like this is sort of a I don't know how I feel about this constraint, but only no one person can be sent to lunch alone. At least 2 people should go to lunch together so that you don't feel sad. Like, this is a rule they had. And I respect that, that they really cared that you don't send a support person to lunch alone and they have to sit and eat in the kitchen by themselves. They had rules around people had meetings, people had to be out certain days of the week. One person does espresso machine training on Wednesdays, so she can only take email on that day, because if you're in chat, you can't break away for an hour to go train everyone on the espresso machine. So they had all these crazy rules. But what's quickly apparent to any operations research person is that this is an optimization problem, right? You're just sort of sliding people's schedules around, subject to forecasted chat demand, which we have down at the bottom in the spreadsheet. And we're essentially saying, how do I mess around with these people such that they always meet demand for every 30-minute block, right? Well, we can write that as an optimization problem. It's essentially just a bunch of inequalities plus an objective. We can write it in code. This is .lp format, which is the nightmare. And we can solve it and hand it back to the support team. So this is, and why not just put it back in Excel? That's what they're used to. So I just take the output from the model, shove it into a spreadsheet, and give it to them. Hey, here's the schedule you can use now on a weekly basis. Just go forth with this one. It says when everyone is on chat. We call that being on point. It says when someone's on email. It says when they have a lunch break, and it's very friendly to people and lets them take a lunch break with a friend. So all sorts of fun stuff about this schedule, and we can just sort of do this research, hand to them, and go on your way. So one thing I would say about this, though, is I like to keep in mind the whole Kobayashi Maru concept from Star Trek, where Kirk essentially changes the rules of this training game and says, oh, if I can't beat the Klingons, I'm just going to break into the system and make it such that I can, right? When it comes to all of these analytics problems, I feel like data science teams really just want to look for the hardest problem possible and then solve it within the rules and sort of flex that analytics muscle, when in fact, sometimes it's okay to just say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing business that way at all. And in fact, as an analytics team, you can often provide sort of a cost-benefit analysis of that too. So, this whole rule about going to lunch with your friends, if we cancel that rule, we don't have to do that. And if we cancel it, we get X or Y benefit. In this particular case, we tested that, and it turned out that we're able to meet demand the exact same with that rule in place, so why not keep it? But there's nothing that ever says you can't just change the way you do business. And that's something that models will never figure out. That's sort of a business decision, and sort of it comes with experience, right? Okay, external insights. I got a bunch of examples. This is essentially stuff that we do, research we do that we would throw up on our blog or provide in a guide to users or inform them of something that they might be curious about, right? So we can go in and look at, for instance, we have lots of people uploading just age data into our system about email addresses. Furthermore, we have an internal AI model that predicts age data. So what is the age distribution of all of these common free mail providers or ISPs? Interestingly enough, Hotmail and Gmail have about the same distribution. You might not believe that, but if you think about Hotmail in a global sense, it actually is true. Furthermore, Microsoft has been pushing young people into Hotmail and its other female services. When you sign up for Xbox Live, you have to have an email address, and it routes you to those first. So that's one way they've been lowering their ages. When you look at something like Comcast, it's much older, which makes sense, because in order to have a Comcast email address, you got to plunk down some money, because you have to have Comcast. So this one study we did, another thing people were interested in knowing from us was what happens to my email engagement once my newsletter ends up on Gmail's new promotions tab. And we were able to look at that. This is 3 weeks of data before and after promotions was introduced. And these are click rates. My y-axis is being cut off there. But basically what it shows is that engagement fell about 10%. So if my engagement was at 100%, now it's 90%, it really wasn't that big of a deal. And that's both positive and negative engagement. So when we talk about things like unsubscribes, same thing. So people thought that the sky was falling. It turns out the sky just lowered a little bit for Gmail. And so the way we see that is that we can at least just tell people exactly how freaked out they should be, right? We can answer that question so that it's not just two people going back and forth. It's fine, it's awful. We've done some stuff around the government. So during the government shutdown, what happened to engagement? What's interesting is that the government agencies that had the most essential employees, or employees who didn't have to stop working and could still check their email, their engagement during that period actually went up, which we would expect in terms of seasonal trends, because we're entering the fall season when people start to do more marketing and start to buy stuff for Christmas, et cetera. And then we see these agencies down at the bottom, SBA, HUD, EPA, their engagement fell off a cliff. Interestingly enough, there are some people still clicking. So those people are breaking the law. Like 10% of employees were still clicking marketing email, which that should have been 0 for some of these agencies. Another one we just looked at, this was this week, we did this for the national review, was Capitol Hill. When do people in Capitol Hill engage with email? What we have here, the really high spiky line, that's send volume, and then we've got a lower line in red, that's click volume. And so what you can see here is during the day, people click, after hours, they don't. Furthermore, engagement falls by about half on Friday. So if I want to engage with someone who's got a senate.gov or a house.gov email address, probably don't want to do it on Friday. During lunchtime, it goes down a bit. In terms of clicks versus sends, it's actually best to send around 2 p.m. because you've got less send volume, but still a lot of engagement, meaning you can hit that top of that inbox a lot better, and people are still engaged right after lunch. So that was a fun one to do. Internal capabilities, so building tools. What does that look like? I'll talk about compliance. So the compliance team is in charge of shutting down bad users, because we have 5 million users, but we do not have 5 million IP addresses. So these people share IP addresses. They send email out over the same IP address. If anyone misbehaves, Gmail, Hotmail, et cetera, might block that IP address, and then we go out of business, right? So we have to shut down evildoers before they spam. And these don't have to be malicious spammers. These could be local businesses just who bought a list and started spamming. They don't know better, right? So we have to shut them down too. So one of the things I looked at when I first started was the entire compliance process. How do you get shut down and what happens to you? And something that amazed me here were these 3 groups of people that get shut down. They upload a large list. They tried to buy a plan of X dollars. They requested high volume approval. They haven't done anything wrong. All they did was try to give us money, and we immediately shut them down. Why did we do that? Well, because if you want to give us a bunch of money, that's what spammers do. They come in with a stolen credit card and like, I want to send 3 billion emails on this weird Diners Club card I have. And so we would shut them down and review them manually. And so there was a lot of anger around this, right? This is very different from most online services where you just sort of flow right through the sign-up process and get to do whatever you want. Email doesn't work like that, right? So we get a lot of anger. A lot of people would say stuff like this, bullshit review process, what a pain in the ass, yada, yada, yada. We get a lot of letters like this. And I understand it, because people would procrastinate. And they would sign up like the day before Black Friday, expecting to email all their customers, and we'd have to tell them, no, you have to wait until next year. And how awful is that, right? You should have planned ahead. People hated that. Well, we can actually build an AI model to solve this problem. So this is what this particular one looks like. I'm not going to go into it because I have no time, but we can actually automate 70% of compliance tickets with this. And in fact now, not only can we shut down bad users by predicting certain aspects of their list, we can predict if you're a good user and send you straight through without having to be reviewed by a human. And that's a really great user experience thing that we can provide. So this sort of goes back to this element of how does a data science team help the user experience of a customer with stuff like this. And in fact, we tried to design it to eliminate risk and complexity, right? So we chose tools that devs were familiar with. If I'm building a model and I want to think about user experience, who's the user of my AI model? One of the users would be the devs who have to care and feed for it. So what am I going to choose? I'm going to choose technologies that they're familiar with that I know won't make their lives hell. So a lot of these NoSQL technologies that I could pick, they might really suck because they're really brittle at this point, especially if I'm slamming 12 billion records into them every month. They might fall over. So instead we went with stuff like sharded Postgres. You know, every engineer in the company knows sharded Postgres. They know how to work with it. It makes their experience better. So why not go for it? A lot of our data is structured anyway. All right, my last little section here. This is the hardest one, building tools for the user. It's hard because building tools is harder than just doing research. And we have to communicate it to the end user who does not eat, breathe, sleep, email every day. Right? So let's make stuff that they can understand. Here's an example. When you sign up for Mailchimp, you used to have to fill in CAPTCHA. And CAPTCHA sucks. I don't even know what's in that little gray box. This is a nightmare. Well, we built these systems to approve users. Why don't we turn them at CAPTCHA? And so we discovered that for a lot of people signing up, we could validate that they were a good actor and that they were a human before they ever hit this. So what does the data science product look like? Nothing. You just don't hit this page, which is great. It's a great user experience. They flow right through. I don't know how much money it earns us, but at least people aren't as pissed when they enter into the next section of the app. And I don't have to communicate it to them. It's just gone. Let's look at send time optimization. So one of the main questions that we're asked by users, when do I send my email? They get really freaked out by this. And in fact, what time you choose to send doesn't matter all that much. You know, max maybe 10% more engagement, which can be a big deal to e-commerce senders. But what we can do is track globally, when do your email addresses click? When do they open? Across everyone sending to them, right? So even if you're a new user, I can look at your email address and say, oh yeah, this is the best time to engage with them. You want to engage with them when they're clicking, but those clicks are to sends that maybe happened a while ago, so I know they've come back into their inbox. They're not just being driven by some notification, right? How are we going to show this to the user? I'm not going to tell them that I used an optimization model. I'm not going to, oh, we got this really cool NRAM database. You just give them a number, right? You just say, hey, if you want to optimize your send time, we think it's 3 p.m. If you want to read more, and there's a lot of math that's behind this, just click this link and there's a blog post, right? But there's no reason to tell people, oh man, look at this graph I built with D3 or whatever. It doesn't matter. Okay, similarly, we've got another one called Discover Similar Segments, which essentially says, give me a small group of people, I will find you more people on your list with those interests. Give me a few tech bloggers, I'll find the rest of the tech bloggers on your list. Right? It just uses a lot of similarity calculations to do this on our internal databases. How does it work? You give me some journalists or something like that. So here I'm doing it on Mailchimp's list. Here's all the tech journalists who read our blog updates. And then I've got this button, Discover Similar Subscribers. We have a list of 5 million email addresses. I don't know who all is on there. I can give you 10 examples. It will find them. We do this through a very complex calculation in a graph. I don't need to tell anyone that. I don't need to show it to them. I don't need to color any bubbles. I just need to have a button. It will save it as a segment. So that's how we sort of handle this problem of communicating to people. We make these things as simple and sort of as transparent as possible. So 4 takeaways. I'm going to wrap up right here. I think data science teams should align themselves with the rest of the business and serve other teams. You're not rock stars just because the Harvard Business Review says you are. Data science products should receive no special treatment. If something can be accomplished by just changing a color, maybe you should go that route. It's actually pretty sad for people working on ad placement for Google, right? Because I can get more revenue uplift by just removing the beige background on the ads. And in fact, they just did this in March. And just making the little ad indication smaller. That's kind of depressing if you think about it from a data science perspective. Get a goal and then buy toys, right? So don't just go out and buy technologies willy-nilly because your competitor does. Figure out what you want to do and then get the stuff that helps solve the problem. And avoid complexity like the plague. I think we'll probably talk about this one in our panel. But if worry about the fact that maybe you're going to get hit by a bus, or maybe some of the other data science team is going to leave the company. So how can you build something that can stay up and running after you go? So those are my 4 big takeaways. And that's about it. Thank you. There's my Twitter handle.
All right. Now, we're going to go for about 30 minutes, then we're going to have lunch. So, John, in case anybody's eating alone, can you run a program?
I can find you friends.
That would be sad. That was really interesting, and I did want to talk about avoiding complexity because isn't there a hunger towards complexity in this? And how do you know where to stop? What's the right, how do you organize your values of what to choose when you got a world where you're driven by expedience, you want accuracy, you want return on investment, you want insight, maybe it's against content. How does each of your companies figure out what you're going to build against and where you're going to deploy your assets? Anybody?
I know for our company, there's one interesting paper that I actually just wrote a blog post on from '93 by this guy named Holt. And he looked at AI models and he said, the title of his paper is really long. It's something like, simple rules work almost as well as complex models on commonly used data sets, or something like that. And the idea was that if I go into a training set of data and I make an AI model that consists of nothing other than an if statement, like if the user signs up with a non-free mail address, they're likely to pay you money. That may be enough of an AI model. And he looks at a lot of problems and decides that the accuracy difference between that and something more complex, like a cart model, is actually very low. And so what we try to do is use simple models whenever we can. And the way we decide is we look at sort of how mission critical is the model, or whatever technique we're using, how much revenue is it bringing in. I feel like tech blogs are just full of examples of deep learning this, deep learning that, because the stories are being driven by people who are making lots of money off of things like ad placement. And so there's to place something a little bit better and make it a little bit more relevant gets them all these clicks and all this money. But I think for a lot of models and a lot of companies, you don't need that additional complexity. And when you have it, someone's got to babysit it.
I think it's probably a little bit more than that, because complexity is always sort of a moving target. When the cost of computing is always dropping, you can do more complex actions for the same money along a curve. Kind of like Moore's Law, maybe not really. But you tell me, is complexity a problem because it's expensive or because there's more variables, hence more error?
I don't think it's a hardware issue. Maybe for some graph-based problems. I think for a lot of problems, it's a human problem. That it's some poor chap's problem to take care of this thing and feed it data and retrain it and make sure that all the features it's using still make sense and aren't out of whack. I just talked with one company where they had a lead scoring model, and one of the features in it was whether the phone number had a 62 at the beginning from this lead, and that was because they were supposed to be in Australia, but it ended up targeting people in Toledo, Ohio.
Right.
And it's like, someone's got to look at all that crap. So the more complex that you make your model, there's this human issue that even if computers get better, humans are still as stupid as we are. I don't know, what do y'all think?
I think that at Optimizely, the way that I would frame this is that complexity brings on a lot of technical debt, which is really tough to deal with. And I wouldn't say that we have a perfect solution to this problem, because I don't really think that there are perfect solutions to this problem. But our customer success team came to me the other day and said, we want to build out this huge customer success center that provides all the information on what our team does. And I'm like, okay, wow, that's a lot. Okay, so we're going to have to figure out, one, why we need this. And so when because they didn't come to me with a problem, they just came to me with, here's the solution and we want to build it. And so we start looking at all the data, and we realize that, so there's two sides of Optimizely's business. There's self-serve customers, and then there's enterprise customers. As you can imagine, more of our revenue comes from enterprise, but there's much fewer actual accounts there. And so it's very difficult for us to make any sort of model with a small data set like that that says, if users have this, they'll be a successful or a typical customer. And even then, you start to think about, how do you define a successful customer, right? And so a lot of the times, in one of our meetings, somebody said, well, a successful customer for Optimizely is one that runs a lot of A/B tests. But if you think about that, your amount of A/B tests that you can run is determined by the amount of traffic that comes to your site. And so we're actively having this sort of conversation, but I think what happens is that there's a difference between using data to avoid complexity and just being smart, right? And
so are you actually sort of creating the product or the user experience in a way that will attract the most valuable kinds of data that you can act on?
Well, in this instance, it's building a product to attract more customers, right? Because the theory is that if enterprise level customers know that they have all of these support options and how great Optimizely support is, they'll sign up for the product. That's not really proven. And it's difficult to prove when you only acquire, like 20 new enterprise customers a month. So you can't really throw out an A/B test and get, significant results on that. And so for me, I think it's really like, okay, let's think really critically about how big this application is that we want to build, and then what's going to be the return on it. And we can't always do that with like statistical significance. It's really like a matter of just thinking really critically about your business.
Right, and Kenneth, you're designing products that take a significant amount of time and investment and graphics, and they have to be kind of consistent in their life. What do you end up looking at? What guides the choices you make about what you're going to look at and analyze?
I think our portfolio games a lot of them are very similar enough that we have enough history from the past that we can tell.
But one's about racing and one's about knights.
Yeah, so we're definitely investing in new types of games as well.
No, but the dynamics are generally about the same.
Yeah, but there are common themes in all of these games. A lot of them are around communication with other players, is that that camaraderie. You play with somebody else, and competition, and basically achievement. So we can identify common themes along all our portfolio of games, and those are the things that we generally tend to focus on. We have a lot of analytics around that a lot of people around the company just kind of keep their eyes on, and that's kind of how we go about optimizing, focusing on games.
Right. It strikes me that historically people have had focus groups or metrics like we didn't get any money, that guide the success of a product. But are you aware that now you're kind of creating and throwing out products that are purposely unfinished? I mean, the point of an Optimizely exercise, in a sense, is it's not, you don't want it finished. You want it sort of 90% there so you can get some feedback and then start adjusting it. And likewise, your games. I don't know if this pertains for the email process as well, but it strikes me as a very kind of different organization of work. You're very attuned to attracting information so you can make it better and better.
Yeah, definitely. I think building new products and optimizing existing ones is a totally different ballgame. And I think a lot of the times, especially in the use case of Optimizely, some of our customers will build out a new feature into their product and they'll A/B test it. But they don't realize that, of course, it's going to win because the other version of the product doesn't have that feature. So you get like, an infinity improvement in the metric that you're measuring. And so for us, it's more about going to market with two different versions of a product and then seeing which one does better. And so in that instance, you have to be really smart about what you're going to market with, because you're not going to be able to you can get user feedback by actually sitting people down before the feature is launched and getting some feedback from them. But you have to use those sorts of tools to decide what you're going to go to market with, and then you can gut check your two ideas against each other.
I think in our business, I think we just accept and recognize that we don't know what is the best product that we can build at the time that we're building it. Right. That's why we want to be quick to the marketplace, have something out in front of our players, so that they can tell us what they like or what they don't like, and then we can change that on the fly.
And is that a whole other kind of process of product creation? Particularly in games, which console games were really finished products. They spent years on them and they shipped them.
I think nowadays our players understand and accept the fact that our games are like a living thing that is just going to constantly evolve and improve over time, and they buy into that, and they're
really
okay.
they expect it to kind of be a little
rough around
crusty.
edges, maybe in the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
But hilariously, people get really mad when you change things. I mean, like you probably all experience this just yourself, like when you log into Gmail and you can't find the feature because it's been moved because it's better for the UI. Like any sort of change, whether it's better in the long run or not, just really, really irritates users. And so you do have to like battle this. I'm going to change up this whole UI because this is better. And then what happens is your users are so confused that they like, drop out of your product because they can't figure out the new UI.
Well,
so it's like actually, incremental changes.
It's a deeper problem than that. Over at Facebook, they call this moving the furniture around. Yeah. Whenever they change the site around, they've moved the furniture around, and that confuses people, and they don't like it. But the guy there told me that they don't really look at the user data initially. They're much more interested in what the response is a month or two out. Because they've moved the furniture around, but they find engagement actually increased later on, and nobody noticed they were using this even more now.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of time how long the learning process is and how rough that is.
Well, and I think one of the dangerous things is a lot of data sources that have become very popular can be very slanted, right? So one of the things companies talk about these days is listening to their social data. But the customers that are on Twitter are not all of your customers, and they can often be quite loud and belligerent. So if you're in an environment where you change very quickly, and Mailchimp does the same thing, where we have a release cycle every 4 weeks, we roll out a new version of the application. We're going to get a skewed view of reality from the folks speaking up on Twitter, and then that will taper off, and we'll slowly realize
they usually don't go on Twitter to say this is fantastic.
Yeah. In our case, they do a fair bit. But one thing that we have done is we've purposefully designed the company. In the fact that we don't have a sales team, and the fact that we don't have account managers, such that we bring on customers where their expectations are that they cannot dictate terms to us, that we operate more like a technology company where we are going to change the product, and we're going to do it quickly and iteratively, and we're not going to just, there's this one high dollar client where we're going to get Stockholm syndrome and not, delete this feature for them, kind of like you would have in the case of Windows XP.
Right. You're doing a SaaS company, and there can only be one line. There can only be one release.
Yeah, and so it's very difficult when you have these huge people that sort of have their own gravity that's sucking your decisions away from what you want.
Well, it's true, and they're used to a whole different kind of sales process. You don't take anybody to golf.
Yeah.
And like a lot of tech was taking guys to golf and getting a big order, but if you're working online. But more to the point, I think, you're creating something and then watching how they engage with it. So that awareness of what data really matters. Which data matters most to you? Sort of number of people, depth of engagement, what are the most meaningful statistics of success?
Yeah, it is who uses things, but one thing we have to be careful about is now that we have so many users, even if 1% of our user base uses a feature, that's still a lot of users, right? And so one thing I was really excited about with collecting data was the ability to remove stuff from the application. I got really excited about that. Like, oh man, we have this section in the app where you can generate a plain text version of your email so that people who check their email from the command line or who don't have images turned on, they'll get maybe this plain text version, they can still read it. And we looked at the data and no one's changing the default plain text version, so let's just get rid of it. It turns out 50,000 people were still altering the plain text version. So we removed that for about 2 minutes and then threw it back in. And that's when I quickly realized the limitations of like, oh yeah, it made sense to me at the time. Like, no one's using this, we can. But in that particular case, what we did was we moved it to a different flow so that it's out of 4,900,000 users workflow, and we put it in a special place for those 50,000 folks who still want it.
Mm-hmm. For us, it's always going to be engagement. We want to make sure that our players like what they see and continue to play the game, and so that's the thing we measure.
But engagement, you're straight mobile.
Yeah.
So is engagement...
And web as well, online.
Yeah, and web. So engagement on the web might be sitting down for 2 hours. Engagement in mobile is sitting down for 2 minutes 50 times a day.
Correct.
So even that, you're sort of looking at a different metric,
aren't
you?
Yeah, for sure.
So is it just off a baseline? How do you benchmark what success is?
Yeah,
relative
to historically, some recent history of how things are either improving or getting worse from what they were before.
And do you find more and more gamers are moving to mobile environments?
Definitely. I mean, that's the trend, right? I mean, you have a device that are with you, pretty much 24/7, and you can decide to play a game when you're bored or when you just have some time to kill, and that's
Right.
That's where
so that's going to change everything too. The kind of content you're creating, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for me, at Optimizely, what I would say is it's really contextual to what we're doing, right? And so I'm not usually involved in the building out of new features. I'm involved in optimizing their effectiveness. And so for me, it's almost always a user experience exercise, and it's reducing the amount of clicks to get to a feature. We really just want to get out of the way and let somebody see data from their experiment right off the bat. So we'll move the UI around to reduce the amount of clicks, which is an engagement-related goal. Yeah.
One thing we touched on yesterday with the VCs was there was a kind of sense that a lot of the frameworks are pretty much done, and they were interested in a lot of application-level stuff. And there was a question about whether the volume and the quality of data coming in might change the kind of frameworks again, sort of that kind of edge core dynamic that new information changes the way it's processed. But in your case, are there new languages, frameworks, styles of work that are influencing where you need to go next? And I guess that gets back to the we're hiring thing too. What do you wish you had more of inside your company?
I think that for us, it's very easy to get to prototype, right? So because we operate like an internal consultancy, we hire people who can do everything from communicate to model to pull data out of systems to write really terrible spaghetti code. So they have that kind of skill set that they can talk to other people, they can build these prototypes. But where it gets tough is where you've got this live app with a lot of users in it. I want to take this prototype and turn it into an actual product that runs on a bunch of data, and it can't be brittle. A lot of tools are coming out right now that promise to work on a lot of data, but then when you look at the examples, not that many companies have a lot of data. So it's always like, oh, I threw 1 million records into it. It's like, well, that's not a lot of data. So for us, that's always the challenge. Can we get enough engineers, enough engineering talent to do that part of it, turn it into a product? And that's very different from a data scientist like me, which would be more of the non-engineer. I write all my code in Perl, and it's terrible. So
I'm proud of it. It's almost a t-shirt.
Yeah, so for us is, I think, more data. We already have a lot of data on how our players act and behave in the game, but I think what's becoming more interesting is what other data sources outside of our environment can we get?
You mean like location?
Not location, but for example, like there's a company collecting weather or climate data, and so is there any relationship of kind of the behavior of our players, how they changes react relative to the weather pattern? Like maybe in the winter months, it's highly likely the case that people in the Northeast or they are kind of stuck inside the house because it's snowing and blizzard outside, and they play games more.
Right.
And something like for example Mother's Day that's coming up, we know for sure that that's kind of the slowest day for our business because most of our players are guys, and this is the day where they kind of show their love to their mom or their wives, and so they would dial down their activity significantly just to celebrate.
Couldn't they just buy her a digital good? I got you this axe.
At Optimizely's current stage of the evolution that we're on, I would say our problem is very similar to Mailchimp. We don't have a shortage of informed hypotheses that we want to execute on. It's hiring the engineering talent to get it out. And so I've been trying to hire an engineer for probably like 2 to 3 months now, which is this is going to be a front-end engineer. The task in this instance is separating out our marketing site from our product. Because like the growth of a startup is like one person builds everything in the beginning, and then it may not be the best for like 2 years down the line, and so you continually have to optimize your technology stack. And so that's like one of our big things that will allow us to create this rapid iteration environment to aggressively A/B test on our website. But right now we can't really deploy that easily. We have a continuous integration environment, but hilarious, we can't even deploy. So my team can't deploy. And so as soon as we can get separated out, I think we'll be a lot better suited to execute on the ideas that we have.
I should take questions from the audience. Ma'am.
Hi, so this question is related to the Mailchimp sort of optimal delivery time example that you showed. It's basically about user experience of optimization or machine learning. And so I'm wondering, the solution that you showed is kind of like either it's this black box solution, like, you know, you just show the time, or you can go and read up all the math behind it, you know. And I was wondering whether that leads to any kind of trust issues or whether you find any kind of benefit in trying to expose some of the learning on a higher level that's not so mathematical.
Yeah, so I would say for most of the AI modeling that we've done at Mailchimp, and predominantly that's been internal, some of them are external like this, trust issues or just change management issues are a huge component of it, right? When I did the anti-abuse model, it took a long time to get the data appropriate to put into the model, like 2 days to build a good random forest, and then 6 months to a year to get people to trust it, right? This is a big problem with any kind of model that's going to make decisions for you. And so when it comes to our customers, what we found, and we've tried some projects where we would actually use data to make decisions for the customer. That's gone a step too far. Everyone hates it, and the way they show they hate it is they turn it off, right? But what they do appreciate is when you give them data. So if I tell them a send time, if I append demographic data to their list, things like that, where I just give it to them, and I don't say like, oh, this is the valuable piece of content this person needs to see. It's this offer. I'm going to send it for you. No. You just tell people that, like, oh, they're interested in this. Let them choose what to do with it. They tend to feel better about it. So that's the one thing I've learned is do not make decisions for people. Give them all the information. Maybe it's out of an AI model. Let them make decisions for themselves.
Almost a design function. Make them feel more powerful,
yep.
more in control.
If you want to have your change management stuff go over well, yeah, you almost make it their idea. Like, oh yeah, you can use it if you want. I'm just going to place it here on this dashboard.
Would you like to move the cursor over there and click?
Right, yeah, you're not preaching at them.
Right. Sir. Why don't you just hand it back? Oh. It's the Berkeley Full Employment Act.
So I'm a quantitative investment strategist at a hedge fund, so I think a lot about the social, I answer my own questions and other people's questions about the social use of what I'm doing on all the data I'm analyzing. So we had a speaker yesterday, it was Jeff Hammerbacher, talking about his controversial quote. What was it? The best minds of our generation are spending their time making people click ads. That sucks. So we have a guy who makes people click ads, who makes games more addictive, and gets people to click spam. So I want you to know this comes out of a place of this comes out of a place of empathy.
I'm a person. Why are you leaving me out?
This comes out of a place of empathy because I think about these questions a lot myself in what I do, and hedge funds are pretty evil. So
I'm really enjoying where this question is going.
So I wanted to get your feedback from you guys on that kind of thinking, and what in your view, what is the social utility of what you're doing?
You dug your hole pretty deep.
Don't you know there are sad people?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's not folks sending spam, right? I mean, my models are purposefully built to make sure that those people get shut down. The email I receive through our system would be like, my son's charter school sends me their newsletter through Mailchimp. My local craft brewery sends their newsletter through Mailchimp. I can unsubscribe to those things. Gmail's made it very easy. The reason why I think that what I'm doing would be a little bit different from this whole clicking on ads thing would be that when I look at anyone whose job is to make people engage with advertisements, then their job is contrary to the user experience, right? Why? Because the customer is not the user. So they're serving their customers, which are advertisers, which to an extent, I guess, allows users to use the thing because it would go out of business if they weren't making money. But for me, I really enjoy my job because I feel like most of the users in our system are legitimate. We're providing a service and they're paying us for it, so I don't have to worry about ads. They're paying us money and I get to make their experience better, and they want to keep giving us money, so I feel pretty good about it. But yes, it still is email. I don't have any, I don't walk around saying, I'm going to change the world one day.
It was probably easiest for me to answer that because I mean I think games definitely have a place in our world. Our games are very social, and so there's that aspect of you have to work alongside a lot of different players in the game to get to a better place for yourself. And also our strategy games are definitely encourages you to kind of explore and think about like what's the best way for a player to get to a certain achievement. And there's also that for role-playing games, it stretches the imaginations of our players. So I think those are all good things. That there's a place for games in our world.
So Optimizely doesn't exist on ad networks. Like we don't optimize ads, so I'm going to assume that we're exempt from that statement. But I think we're in a similar position with Mailchimp. Like we're not making a product that's altruistic or changing the world. It's helping businesses and nonprofits, right? And so if you look at it from that perspective, there's some sort of social good to it, right? We have Optimizely.org, which nonprofits can get like very, very discounted pricing. So I think that's where I see the good in it.
I must say, I would have enjoyed Jeff's quote more if he had acknowledged that he had spent a great deal of time making a large fortune placing ads and teaching people how to do this. So, that was weird. But I am curious. Hedge funds. How do you feel about hedge funds, big data, what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one reason I asked the question of you guys because I have my own. Moral quandary about what I do. So, and I don't.
It's cool if you haven't resolved it because I think everybody's kind of circling around being anxious about being in a world where there are too many systems of control that are too close to what seems like perfect.
Yeah. So to some extent, I feel like it's too much like horse betting. Like I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make money without necessarily adding a lot of social good. Now, there are people who want our product, just like all of you guys. There's people who pay us to try to, get them better investments. And some of these people are pension funds. And so to some extent, I'm trying to make more money from pension funds, but I'm taking it from somebody else to do that at some point. Because it's a zero-sum game. So
that's a Wall Street problem since forever.
Well, I would say generally the issue is one of the ways that I fear this whole data science world is that analytics benefits humans, but currently it's also antagonistic to our experience, right? That most of the users of analytics and data science are businesses, and businesses with money, large businesses, not individuals, right? And so when I think about how data is being used, to some extent, like, I feel like Mailchimp is helping small businesses execute their whatever, and that's not so bad. We also see that we're giving more power to people who want us to act in a certain way, right? And we are contingent beings. We're not just sort of fully self-possessed all the time and know exactly what we're doing, right? And so the more data that these businesses have on us, and the more they're able to target us, both who we actually are and maybe what we publicly portray, maybe our fears, maybe our insecurities, the more they're able to manipulate us a little bit, right? So, we saw ad targeting at sort of a very stupid level for a century, things like sex sells, right? That's an observation about humanity that businesses can act on. Now, what if we're getting a million little tiny sex sells observations about me and about you, et cetera? It is a bit frightening, right? So I'm sympathetic to this fear that not only are we maybe wasting our time, but we're actually degrading humanity's freedom in a sense.
My father is in the Direct Mail Marketing Hall of Fame. We could go along. This has been an issue for a while. Take one more question from the back of the room, and then we'll break for lunch.
Hi, I'm Professor Ramakela. I'm with the iSchool here. I have both the answers to the previous question and a follow-on question. I think, there are two things. There are businesses and there are individuals, right? So all the things that you folks are doing, because it pertains to my own research, is just making it more efficient. So if you can find what somebody wants, and you place an ad which is targeted so that they actually benefit, what is benefiting the business is also benefiting the individual, I think. So I don't think there necessarily needs to be a conflict. That's one point.
But that assumes that we know what's best for ourselves. I mean, I think the tobacco companies and Dunkin' Donuts would love that argument, right? And so if I'm in a self-driving car that all of a sudden it's now more efficient for it to route me 1 block over so it goes past Krispy Kreme because it knows Krispy Kreme wants me and I want Krispy Kreme. That's one way to look at it, that is more efficient.
Sounds like an optimal engagement.
Yeah, right? Everyone benefits except, humans are poor decision makers, right? We cannot balance the long term with the short term. So I want Krispy Kreme now and then I'm full of self-loathing 30 minutes from now. And that's not even long-term.
Target you for an antidepressant at that point.
Yeah.
You're just not thinking big.
Just put a bottle of gin in my hand right after that.
So the point is, actually, I like that.
And a DUI lawyer.
So I think there are things which are terrible for people and there are things which are good, and the ones which are good, you can make it more efficient. But my question then pertains to the next part. But partly, so it's, you want to grow a pie and you want to share it. So right now what I see is business, it's a bit like airline flights, right? You optimize yield management from a company viewpoint. But it means our sitting space gets compressed, so we really were very uncomfortable, right? So the question is, how do you make certain there are some sort of constraints while you optimize business or make it more efficient? But my other question for you, in digital marketing, it's sort of a little bit more technical question. This whole nirvana is, you know exactly what makes a difference so you can target accurately, right? This so-called attribution, that you know what to attribute credit for and whether what you're doing is being effective. In my own work, I've actually found it's not really the case that most advertising are actually complete waste of money, 99% of it in some situations. So I think it really goes to what social scientists have been doing in causal modeling, because you're talking of all these real-time experiments, feedback, how do you tune things on the fly. And I'm really curious about how much you've really looked at this attribution in order to optimize on the fly. The fact that Google bought Autometry and other acquisitions on causality and on attribution shows an important problem, that the feedback loop that you're talking about actually is pretty broken. And I'm sort of curious about your thoughts on it in each of your areas. How effectively can you evaluate?
In the interest of time, we'll set aside the question about how corporations and people can be good, because moral existential question. But as to the second part.
The feedback loop question?
Yeah.
That was a really long question.
Why don't you compress it down to like 20 words?
Your feedback, okay, the feedback to evaluate campaigns is goofy. It's very poor quality. Yes or no, and
well,
how much you
what
improve?
I've seen is that, at least in our industry, certain people have tried to gather engagement. So, oh, what are you clicking on in past emails? And use that feedback loop to optimize future content. And in those situations where I'm saying, oh yeah, out of everything I'm providing you, you keep buying the wine, so now I'm going to, like, in my next newsletter, shove more wine down your throat. Those solutions tend to fail. And users tend to turn them off because they think they know better. So this whole idea of just retargeting you by throwing the exact same thing at you, I mean, Amazon does that. It must work in certain contexts. I don't know that it necessarily works in all contexts, and that I think by bringing more data into the picture, like you talked about bringing weather data into the picture, we can maybe break out of that loop. In all of these analytics industries, there's always some dangerous death spiral, right? So in the revenue management, yield management industry that you just mentioned, there's the hotel revenue death spiral, where every single hotel in an area has a revenue management model that looks at its competitors and price elasticity, and they all just keep lowering their prices until everyone's at zero. And that's a well-documented thing. We've seen it on Amazon, where a bunch of people will keep pricing used products up. And so I think that by bringing in all these other data sources, you can break out of that, because I've seen, at least in email, it doesn't necessarily always work to think that this one thing you're gathering in this feedback loop is all that matters for this person. I mean, humans change their behavior all the time.
I think the feedback loop, I don't believe the feedback loop is broken as long as you know what you are solving for. So if you just worry about how someone is reacting, this minute or the next hour, then you're not solving for the long-term good or satisfaction of of your users. So I think if you're being thoughtful about it and you set up experiments properly, I think this type of feedback loop is extremely valuable and useful.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the feedback loop quality question is sort of a you don't know what you don't know type question. But for me, it's exactly like that. That's why I experiment, right? We'll come up with a hypothesis and we'll test it. And even the feedback from the experiment will be such that you could have produced a false positive, or maybe later on the line when you're looking at your conversion rate, you had regression back to the mean. But that's when you optimize your process so that you can improve the quality of the data.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's give our audience a hand.